Women in ancient China did not have the same social and political status as men. Women were subordinate to first their fathers, then their husbands, and finally, in the case of being left a widow, their sons. Often physically abused, socially segregated, and forced to compete for their husbands' affections with concubines, a woman's place was an unenviable one. Despite the harsh realities of living in a male-dominated society and being forever under the weight of philosophical and religious norms, which were created by men, to work for men, some women did break through these barriers. In imperial China, everyone knew it was better to be born a male, and even female characters in traditional literature sometimes stated that they had been a man in a previous life, but had reappeared as a woman in this one as a punishment for past deeds. The birth of a male child was highly valued, as he would be expected to provide financial support for the family and carry on the family name. On the other hand, daughters were seen as future members of their husbands' families, and they were unable to earn money for their natal families. This cultural perspective led to the unfortunate practice of many baby girls being abandoned shortly after birth. Those girls who did survive were given such names as chastity, thrift, or the names of flowers and birds, in the hope that the girl would live up to that name and receive attractive offers of marriage. Women were expected to excel in 4 areas: fidelity, cautious speech, industriousness, and graceful manners. A woman's virtue was a particularly valued attribute in Chinese society. These beliefs about the roles did not come out of nowhere. Confucius, the teacher of the religion of Confucianism, taught that women's roles were to look after the men in their families. Most did not question his teachings and continued to live with these rules. Not only the fact that they believed women were inferior to men and should stay at home, people believed that women were both morally and intellectually inferior to men and thus needed men's control and guidance. While men were valued for their hard work and getting the money, women were disparaged because they couldn't live without a man's work. Marriages in ancient China were usually arranged by both sets of parents, based on economic and social considerations rather than love. There were even professional matchmakers to find suitable pairings who also considered astrology in guiding their selections. Neither did parents wait until their children were of age, as many marriages had been arranged when the couple were still young children or even babies. The typical age for marriage was the early 20s for men and the late teens for women. However, child brides were not unheard of, although it was prohibited by law. If a marriage had been arranged, but the groom died close to the ceremony, the wedding might go ahead anyway and the bride joined her new family as a widow. After the wedding ceremony, the bride went to live with the groom in his house or that of his parents, but could still keep her family surname. The wife was not much more than a physical piece of her husband's property. This is further illustrated in the ancient practice of foot binding. Girls from age 3 upwards had their feet crushed in bindings for years. This painful practice aimed to create small and delicate feet, as it was believed to be appealing to the future husband. This practice highlights the limited autonomy and objectification of women during that time. In ancient China, a man could divorce his wife, but she had no such right except if the husband particularly mistreated his wife's family. The accepted grounds for divorce were failure to bear a son, evidence of being unfaithful, lack of filial piety to the husband's parents, talking too much, and jealousy. From a modern perspective, some of these grounds may appear superficial. However, it should be mentioned that in Chinese society divorce was a serious action with negative social repercussions for both parties. Another social convention was that widows should not remarry. Many did anyway amongst the lower classes, but the idea that the fates and astrological charts had ordained that a particular couple should live together in matrimony was a difficult hurdle to get over in the case of a second marriage. Marriage and children were the expected normal course for all adults. And only those men who could not afford a wife did not marry. During the Han Dynasty, for instance, unmarried women brought a special tax on their family, and women with babies were given a 3-year exemption from tax, and their husband a 1-year exemption. Regarding the gender of children, sons were much more desired than daughters. As the old proverb went, a boy is born facing in, a girl is born facing out, meaning that eventually a girl would ultimately leave the family and pay homage to the ancestors of another family. Having a son then greatly helped the wife to become accepted in her adopted family. Women of lower classes, such as farmers' wives, were expected to work in agriculture, particularly in regions where rice cultivation was prevalent. However, as many farmers did not own their own land, women working in the fields were subject to abuse from landowners. During drought seasons and crop failure, women were also forced into prostitution. In ancient China, it was customary for men to have only one wife, but they openly engaged with courtesans and invited concubines to reside permanently in their family homes. Prostitution was a visible aspect of urban life, with establishments where prostitutes operated being frequented by officials and merchants for entertainment purposes. Concubines, meanwhile, apart from the pleasures their charms might bring, often provided a family with the all-important male heir when the wife only produced daughters. However, it is important to note that concubines did not hold the same legal status as wives. They were considered servants rather than equal partners. Similarly, children born to concubines did not have the same rights of inheritance and social status as children born to wives. The number of concubines in the household was only limited by the husband's means. The wife must never show any jealousy to her husband's concubines. It was, as we have seen, grounds for divorce, but also it was thought there was a particularly nasty corner of hell awaiting jealous wives. Concubines usually came from the lower classes and entered the households of the wealthier families in society. A girl from a richer family would only have been given as a concubine to an even richer family or the royal palace. Although it was extremely hard to have ambitions as a woman, there was an extraordinary lady that challenged the way Chinese life was lived by the name of Empress Wu. She was the only woman in Chinese history to have ruled as emperor, not only gaining power but keeping it. She ruled during the Tang dynasty from 618 to 705. It was the time for freedom for women in China, where a number of exceptional women contributed to the culture of politics, as they were able to work instead of being a stay-at-home mother. Also in this time period, foot binding was not acceptable. Over the years, slowly women began to gain independence around the 19th and 20th century. The Chinese nation began to listen to women by giving them the right to speak through speeches and magazines. This was the first wave of feminism, to raise women's consciences about their position, and they were encouraged to modern ways of life.